I'm Randall Turner, 64, and for 30 years I fixed other people's broken dreams while mine crumbled. My son Jacob once called me his hero. Last month when I won the lottery, he screamed, "You won't see a cent," and threw me onto the street like garbage. What he didn't know my name was on that ticket, not his. Sometimes life gives second chances to those who deserve them, not those who demand them. Before I tell you how his greed cost him everything, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. My journey began long before that fateful lottery win, back when I still believed family meant something sacred. I spent over 40 years as a carpenter in Portland, Oregon. There's something honest about working with wood. It doesn't lie to you, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Every grain tells its own story, just like the wrinkles on my hands tell mine. I built houses for countless families, watching them move in with dreams as fresh as new paint, all while struggling to keep my own modest home from falling apart. My workshop behind our small house on Maple Street was nothing fancy, just a converted garage with tools I'd collected over decades. The smell of sawdust and varnish was my cologne, and the calluses on my palms were medals of honor. That workshop was where I felt most alive, most myself. It was also where I taught Jacob, my only son, how to respect the craft. Sandra. My wife used to joke that I loved my tools more than her. That wasn't true, of course. When cancer took her 8 years ago, it carved out a part of me no tool could ever repair. She was the one who insisted we buy lottery tickets every week with the same 5 numbers. Her birthday, our anniversary, and the day Jacob was born. Dreamer's tax, she called it. But it was our little ritual, our way of holding on to hope when medical bills were drowning us. After Sandra passed, it was just Jacob and me. He was already in his 20s by then, but those early years of raising him are still the proudest of my life. I remember the first time I put a hammer in his tiny 5-year-old hands to help build a birdhouse. His face lit up like I'd given him the moon. His little tongue would stick out the side of his mouth when he concentrated, just like his mother's did. We used to go fishing on the Columbia River every summer. Neither of us was particularly good at it, but that wasn't the point. We'd sit for hours talking about everything and nothing. When he was 12, he caught a trout so big, I was certain he'd hooked someone's boot. The pride on his face when we took that fish home for dinner. That's a memory that kept me warm through many cold nights later on. Our camping trips in the Cascades were another tradition. Just a simple tent, sleeping bags that had seen better days, and a sky full of stars above us. Jacob knew all the constellations. He'd point them out while we roasted marshmallows over the fire. "Dad," he'd say, "when I grow up, I want a job where I can make something real like you do." Those words were worth more than any paycheck. Jacob's high school graduation nearly broke my back. Not from pride, though there was plenty of that, but from working double shifts at the construction site to pay for it all. The application fees for colleges, the suit for prom, the class ring he wanted so badly. I never let him know how tight money was. That wasn't his burden to carry. For his wedding, I built him a hope chest from cherry wood I'd been saving for something special. It took me 6 months of evenings and weekends carving intricate patterns of intertwined branches to symbolize how lives come together. I remember the tears in his eyes when I presented it to him and Heather at their rehearsal dinner. "This is worth more than anything money could buy," he said then. I sometimes wonder if he remembers saying that. The changes in Jacob didn't happen overnight. They came slowly, like water eroding stone after he married Heather. She came from money, the kind of family that had summer homes and winter vacations. At first I tried not to take it personally when she wrinkled her nose at my paint-stained work pants or changed the subject whenever I talked about carpentry. I told myself she just needed time to get to know me. There were early warning signs I chose to ignore. Like the way Jacob started canceling our fishing trips, or how he'd check his watch repeatedly when visiting me, clearly counting the minutes until he could leave. Heather would make comments about upgrading their social circle within earshot, and Jacob would laugh along instead of defending me. The Christmas dinner that opened my eyes happened 3 years ago. I'd spent weeks crafting a delicate jewelry box for Heather, inlaid with mother of pearl in a floral pattern I knew she liked. When she opened it, she said, "Oh, how rustic," in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. Then she proudly displayed the diamond bracelet her parents had given her, making sure everyone noticed the price tag she'd accidentally left attached. Jacob looked embarrassed, not for her, but for me. That was when I knew my son was becoming someone I didn't recognize. As the years passed, my body began to betray me the way my son had. Carpentry is hard on the joints, and arthritis doesn't care how much you love your work. My fingers, once as precise as surgical instruments, became stiff and uncooperative. The pain on cold mornings made me dread getting out of bed, but bills don't pay themselves. The housing market crash hit independent contractors like me especially hard. Suddenly, no one wanted custom cabinets or handcrafted furniture. They wanted cheap, quick, and disposable. I started taking whatever jobs I could find, repairing fences, refinishing floors, anything to keep the lights on. I remember installing a laminate countertop for a family while hiding how much it hurt to kneel, all for a fraction of what I once earned. Medical insurance was a luxury I couldn't afford. The doctor told me I needed knee replacement surgery, but that conversation ended when he mentioned the cost. Instead, I bought knee braces at the drugstore and swallowed over-the-counter pain pills like they were candy. Through it all, I kept buying that weekly lottery ticket, the same 5 numbers every Wednesday without fail. It was my promise to Sandra and to myself. I'd stand in line at Jerry's convenience store, counting out exact change from my pocket, sometimes wondering if I was just throwing money away. But then hope doesn't come with a money-back guarantee. The call from Jacob came on a Tuesday evening in February, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly 3 months. I was sitting in my recliner, icing my knee after a long day installing shelves in a garage, when the phone rang. Seeing his name on the screen sent a jolt through me stronger than any pain medication. "Dad," he said, with a warmth I hadn't heard in years. "How have you been? I've been thinking about you." The conversation flowed easily, as if the distance between us had never existed. He asked about my health, my work, whether the roof was still leaking. I was so grateful for his attention that I answered honestly, telling him about the arthritis, the declining jobs, the notice from the bank about falling behind on mortgage payments. "That's actually why I'm calling," Jacob said, his voice taking on a tone of practiced concern. "Heather and I have been talking, and we have a proposition for you. We just bought that big new house in West Hills. You know, the development with the golf course. Anyway, it has this finished basement that would make a perfect apartment. We want you to come live with us." I nearly dropped the phone. After years of being kept at arm's length, this sudden invitation seemed too good to be true. And perhaps it was, but loneliness makes fools of even the wisest men. "I don't know, Jacob," I said, hesitating. "I've lived in this house for 30 years. Your mother and I bought it together." "Dad, you can barely afford the property taxes," he countered. "The place is falling apart. You're not getting any younger, and honestly, I worry about you living alone. Plus, the grandkids miss you." That last part sealed it. Mia and Tyler, 7 and 5 years old, with Sandra's eyes and Jacob's smile. I'd seen them only a handful of times in the past year, each visit supervised as if I were some kind of threat. "Well," I said slowly, "I suppose I could at least come look at the place." "Great." Jacob sounded genuinely excited. "And think about it. You could sell your house, pay off the mortgage, and have a little nest egg for retirement. No more working yourself to death. The idea took root in my mind, blossoming with possibilities. Maybe this was Jacob's way of rebuilding our relationship. Maybe Heather had matured. Maybe I could be a real grandfather at last. So I agreed, and 2 weeks later I put my house on the market. Selling the home Sandra and I had built a life in was like selling pieces of my soul. Each room held memories that no buyer could see or value. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking Jacob's growth. The dent in the living room wall from when Sandra tried to move the sofa by herself. The garden she'd lovingly tended, now overgrown but still blooming with her favorite daffodils each spring. The real estate agent suggested I declutter to make the place more appealing. Buyers want to imagine their own lives here, not see yours, she explained, not unkindly. So I packed away 30 years of living into cardboard boxes, most of which ended up donated or discarded. I kept only what truly mattered: Sandra's rocking chair, our wedding album, my essential tools, and a few pieces I'd built myself. The housing market was still recovering, and my little house needed more repairs than I could afford to make. The final offer came in well below what the place was worth, but beggars can't be choosers. After paying off the remaining mortgage and settling some medical bills, I had just enough left to avoid being completely dependent on Jacob and Heather. The day before closing, my neighbor Tom came over with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on the front porch steps where we'd watched countless sunsets together. "You sure about this move, Randy?" he asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "Not really," I admitted. "But what choice do I have? The arthritis isn't getting better and the money's running out." Tom took a long swig of his beer. "Just be careful with family and money. They're like oil and water sometimes. Make sure you get everything in writing, even with your own son." I laughed off his warning. "Jacob's not after my money, Tom. Hell, I barely have any. If anything, he's helping me out." Tom didn't smile back. "Just watch yourself. I've seen it before. People change when there's cash on the table." I should have listened. But hope is a powerful narcotic, and I was already addicted to the idea of being part of a family again. Moving day came with unseasonable rain, as if the sky itself were weeping for my decision. I packed my old Ford pickup to the brim, said goodbye to the only home my son had ever known growing up, and drove across town to start my new life. Jacob and Heather's house was everything my home wasn't. New, imposing, perfect. It looked like something from a magazine, with manicured landscaping and a 3-car garage. The grandkids ran out to greet me, their excitement genuine, at least while Jacob helped unload my meager possessions. Heather stayed in the doorway, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Dad, let me show you your new place," Jacob said, leading me through a side door that opened directly to the basement stairs. I tried not to let my face fall as we descended into what they called the apartment. The space was large but unfinished, with concrete floors, exposed pipes along the ceiling, and a small bathroom tucked in the corner. A twin-bed card table with 2 folding chairs and an old love seat constituted the furnishings. One small window near the ceiling provided the only natural light. "It's a work in progress," Jacob explained hurriedly, noticing my expression. "I was thinking we could finish it together, like a project. Put in some proper flooring, drywall the ceiling, maybe even add another window." "Sure," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "It's got potential. And the best part is you'll have your privacy down here, but you're still close to family," he continued. "We can set up your woodworking tools in that corner as long as you're careful about the noise and dust." I nodded, already calculating how I could make this sterile space into something livable. I'd built houses from the ground up. Surely I could improve a basement. And Jacob was right. The important thing was being near family. The space itself was secondary. or so I told myself. The reality of living in Jacob and Heather's house became clear within the first week. I wasn't a family member. I was somewhere between a tenant and a servant. Meals were a particularly revealing ritual. I was rarely invited to join them upstairs, instead receiving a text when dinner was ready, so I could come collect a plate to eat alone in the basement. When I was included in family activities, it was usually to serve some purpose. "Dad, could you watch the kids for a few hours?" Or, "Dad, the garbage disposal is making that noise again. Can you take a look?" I didn't mind being useful. That had been my identity for decades. But I minded being invisible when my usefulness ended. The grandchildren were my saving grace. Mia and Tyler would sneak down to the basement when their parents were busy, eager for stories, or to watch me work with wood. I set up my small workbench and began making them toys. A train for Tyler, a dollhouse for Mia. Their delight made the cold basement feel warmer. One evening, about 3 weeks after moving in, I was reading in my bed when voices drifted down through the heating vent. Jacob and Heather arguing in their bedroom directly above. "He's been here almost a month and you still haven't asked him," Heather was saying, her voice sharp. "I can't just demand money from him," Jacob replied. "He sold the house for less than we hoped. He needs that cash for his medical stuff. We need it more. The second mortgage is due next week and the credit cards are maxed out. We took him in for God's sake. The least he could do is contribute." Their voices lowered, but I'd heard enough. The house of cards was starting to collapse. My son hadn't invited me out of love or concern. He'd hoped I'd bring financial salvation with me. The realization should have crushed me, but oddly, it brought clarity. I decided then to keep my weekly lottery ritual to myself. One small thing that remained exclusively mine. Every Wednesday, I would walk to the convenience store 6 blocks away, no matter how much my knees protested. I'd chat with Jerry, the owner, about the weather or sports, then carefully select my ticket. Sandra's birthday, our anniversary, and the day Jacob was born. The same 5 numbers I'd played for 30 years. I'd fold the ticket into my wallet, return to the basement, and add it to the others in a cigar box I kept hidden behind my tool chest. It was more than a lottery ticket. It was a connection to Sandra, to our shared dreams, to a time when hope didn't feel foolish. It was my private ritual of remembrance and possibility in a house where I was becoming increasingly invisible. Some days change your life so completely that looking back they seem to glow with an almost supernatural light, dividing your existence into clear before and after. Saturday, April 15th, was such a day for me. It began ordinarily enough. I woke early as decades of construction work had programmed into my body clock. The house was quiet, with Jacob and Heather taking the kids to soccer practice. I made a pot of coffee in the small microwave nook they'd designated as my kitchenette, and settled into my routine of checking news on my ancient laptop. Almost as an afterthought, I remembered it was the morning after the lottery drawing. I navigated to the state lottery website, not expecting anything. After all, I'd checked these same numbers approximately success. The page loaded slowly on my outdated computer, and I sipped my coffee while waiting. When the numbers appeared on screen, I nearly choked. I blinked hard, certain my eyes were playing tricks. The 5 numbers marched across the screen in perfect, impossible alignment with my ticket. I fumbled for my wallet with trembling hands, extracting the ticket with the care one might use handling a wounded bird. I laid it beside the computer screen and checked again, and again, and a 4th time. $7,200,000. The jackpot that had been building for months. My hands began to shake so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug onto the concrete floor. I felt lightheaded, my heart pounding as if trying to escape my chest. In all my daydreams about winning, I'd never truly believed it would happen. It was the possibility that mattered, not the reality. Now reality had arrived with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. I don't know how long I sat there staring alternately at the screen and the ticket. Minutes, maybe hours. The magnitude wouldn't settle into my understanding. All I knew was that I needed to tell someone, and despite everything, that someone was Jacob. I heard the garage door opening upstairs, the chaotic energy of children returning home, the thump of soccer bags hitting the floor. Taking a deep breath, I tucked the ticket securely back into my wallet and climbed the stairs to the main house. "Jacob!" I called, my voice strangely steady despite my inner turmoil. "Do you have a minute?" He looked surprised to see me in the main part of the house uninvited. "What's up, Dad? We're kind of in a rush. We have the Petersons coming for dinner." "It's important," I said simply. Something in my tone must have registered because he followed me back down to the basement. I closed the door behind us and took out the ticket. "I won," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "The lottery. Last night's drawing." Jacob stared at me blankly, then laughed. "Very funny, Dad." "I'm serious." I showed him the ticket, then pulled up the website on my laptop. "These are the winning numbers. I've been playing them for 30 years. His face underwent a remarkable transformation. Disbelief to shock to something I couldn't quite name. He grabbed the laptop, checking and rechecking as I had done. "Holy shit," he whispered finally. "How much?" "7.2 million. About 4.5 after taxes if I take the lump sum." Jacob's eyes widened, calculations visibly running behind them. Then he did something unexpected. He hugged me. The first real embrace we'd shared in years. "Dad, this is incredible." His voice cracked with emotion that seemed genuine. "You did it. We need to tell Heather and the kids." Before I could respond, he was bounding up the stairs, shouting for his wife. I followed more slowly, uncertain what hurricane I'd just unleashed. The next few hours were a blur of excitement. For the first time since moving in, I was the center of attention. Heather actually hugged me, her designer perfume enveloping me in a cloud of sudden affection. The children danced around, though they clearly didn't understand the significance beyond everyone's excitement. Jacob made celebratory drinks, proposing toast after toast to Dad's incredible luck and our new beginning. I didn't miss the use of "our," but in the moment I was too caught up in the joy of family connection to question it. We ordered expensive takeout for dinner, canceling the Petersons with a vague excuse. The conversation flowed around possibilities: vacations, home improvements, investments. "We should pay off the house first," I suggested during a lull, "and set up college funds for Mia and Tyler." "Absolutely," Jacob agreed immediately. "And get you a proper doctor for that knee. Maybe one of those specialists in Seattle everyone talks about." "And the master bathroom renovation we've been wanting," Heather added. "The marble from Italy we saw in that magazine." I noticed she didn't mention finishing my basement apartment, but I let it slide. There would be plenty of time to sort out priorities once the money was actually in hand. That night, I lay in my bed listening to the sounds of Jacob and Heather still celebrating upstairs, their voices occasionally rising enough for me to catch snippets about cars and vacation homes. Sleep eluded me entirely. For the first time, I truly understood what Sandra had meant about the lottery being a dreamer's tax. We pay not just for the infinitesimal chance of winning, but for the dream of what winning might mean. Now that the dream had materialized, I found myself oddly unprepared for its weight. The weekend passed in a whirlwind of increasingly grandiose plans. Jacob began researching yacht prices online. Heather called a contractor about expanding their already enormous kitchen. Neither consulted me, though. Both referenced our winnings with casual ownership that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. By Sunday evening, an unmistakable shift had occurred in the atmosphere. What began as shared excitement had morphed into something proprietary. I noticed Jacob watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, a calculating expression on his face. Heather's questions about the claiming process became more pointed, more frequent. "We should go to the lottery office first thing tomorrow," I said over Sunday dinner, which I'd been invited to join at the main table for a change. "They'll need identification and the original ticket." Jacob set down his fork with deliberate care. "About that, Dad. I think it would be best if I held on to the ticket overnight, just to keep it safe." The table fell silent. Even the children seemed to sense the sudden tension. "That's okay," I replied, keeping my voice light. "I've got it secure in my wallet. We can go together in the morning." "Dad." Jacob's tone had changed harder now. "You're living in an unfinished basement. What if there's a leak, or what if you misplace it? This is life-changing money we're talking about." "I understand that," I said, my dinner turning to ash in my mouth. "But the ticket has my name on it. I bought it. I've kept it safe for the past 24 hours. I can manage one more night." Heather laughed, a brittle sound, devoid of humor. "After all we've done for you, taking you in when no one else would, and now you're being selfish about this. We're family. What's yours is ours. Isn't that how it works?" The grandchildren were watching with what? Mia's lower lip trembled slightly. "I think everyone needs to calm down," I said quietly. "Nobody's being selfish. We're all tired and excited. Let's talk about this tomorrow with clear heads." "There's nothing to talk about," Jacob snapped, rising from his chair. "We've been carrying you for months. If it weren't for us, you'd be in some state nursing home by now. The least you could do is show some gratitude." His words sliced through me, exposing the illusion I'd been nurturing since moving in. This wasn't my home. These people weren't my refuge. I was a burden they'd reluctantly assumed, and now they saw a payoff for their trouble. "Jacob," I began, but he cut me off. "I want that ticket." His voice had risen to a shout. "Now, no." The word came out stronger than I intended. What happened next occurred with such speed that later I would struggle to piece the sequence together. Jacob lunged across the table, reaching for my pocket, where he knew I kept my wallet. I stood up, backing away, and his hand clamped around my arm with bruising force. We struggled briefly, his face contorted in a rage I didn't recognize. Heather was screaming something. The children were crying. "You won't see a cent of this money," Jacob roared, his spittle hitting my face. "It's our house, our ticket." He dragged me toward the front door, my arthritic knee screaming in protest. I lost my balance on the porch step, falling heavily onto the manicured lawn. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, and for a terrifying moment I couldn't breathe. From the ground, I looked up at my son, silhouetted in the doorway. Behind him, Heather stood with an arm around each sobbing child. Neighbors had come onto their porches, drawn by the commotion. "Don't come back," Jacob said, his voice suddenly quiet, and all the more menacing for it. "The ticket or nothing." The door slammed with the finality of a coffin lid closing. I lay there for several minutes, the cool grass against my cheek, trying to process what had just happened. Humiliation washed over me in waves, followed by a deep, aching grief that had nothing to do with my throbbing knee. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself up and limped to my truck parked at the curb, the only possession other than the clothes on my back and the wallet in my pocket that remained accessible to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 30 years of playing the lottery, I'd finally won the jackpot and lost everything else in the same weekend. As I turned the key in the ignition of my old Ford, I wondered if Sandra was watching from somewhere and what she would make of the son we'd raised. I spent that night reclined in the truck's seat at a highway rest stop, too afraid to check into a motel in case Jacob reported the ticket stolen. Sleep came in fitful bursts between jolts of pain from my knee and heart. By morning, one thing had become crystal clear: I needed help, and not the kind that family apparently provided. The truck's seat had left my back in knots, and my knee throbbed with each pulse of my heart as I drove through the morning light. I hadn't slept more than an hour total. My mouth tasted like old pennies, and my thoughts churned like a cement mixer. I needed advice from someone who wouldn't immediately try to claim a piece of my newfound fortune. Frank Doherty had been my attorney decades ago when I'd set up my small carpentry business. We'd kept in loose contact over the years, occasionally running into each other at the hardware store or local diner. He'd retired from his big firm 5 years back, but still did consultation work from a small office above the bakery on Main Street. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it would be Frank. I parked behind the bakery, the smell of fresh bread momentarily distracting me from my troubles. The stairs to Frank's office nearly defeated me. Each step sent lightning bolts of pain through my knee. By the time I reached the top, sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool morning air. Frank looked up from his desk when I entered, his bushy white eyebrows rising in surprise. "Randy Turner, as I live and breathe. You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet, my friend." "Feel worse than I look," I admitted, easing myself into the client chair across from him. "What brings you in? Not another divorce, I hope." He chuckled, then sobered when he saw my expression. "Seriously, what's wrong? You need medical attention." I shook my head. "I need legal advice, Frank. And maybe a friend." "You've got both. Talk to me." The story spilled out of me then. The lottery ticket, Jacob's reaction, being thrown out of the house with nothing but my wallet and truck. Frank listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he removed his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Well," he said finally, "I've seen money turn people ugly before, but your own son, that's a special kind of disappointment." "What should I do?" I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted. "Can Jacob actually claim the ticket is his since I was living in his house?" Frank shook his head emphatically. "Not a chance. You purchased that ticket with your own money, your name is on it, and you possess it. It's legally yours 100%. A weight lifted from my chest. "You're sure?" "Absolutely. But," he held up a cautionary finger, "that doesn't mean Jacob won't try something desperate. People have done worse for far less money. You need to protect yourself and that ticket." He outlined a plan, starting with documenting my injuries from being thrown out and filing a police report about the threat. Next, finding secure temporary housing where Jacob couldn't find me easily. Finally, claiming the ticket through proper channels with minimal publicity. "Most states allow winners to claim through a trust or LLC to maintain privacy," Frank explained. "I can set that up for you today, and I'm calling my doctor friend to look at that knee before it swells anymore." True to his word, Frank arranged everything with surprising efficiency. By afternoon, I was checked into a modest motel under Frank's name, had seen a doctor who prescribed proper pain medication and scheduled a follow-up, and had the beginnings of a trust established to claim my winnings. Lying on the motel bed that night with my knee properly elevated and the pain finally dulled to a manageable throb, I took stock of my situation. I was essentially homeless, with only a few days' worth of clothing hastily purchased from a discount store. My tools, my photographs, Sandra's rocking chair, all were locked in Jacob's basement. Yet the ticket in my wallet represented a future I couldn't have imagined a week ago. The local news had already begun reporting on the unclaimed winning ticket, noting only that it had been purchased at Jerry's convenience store. I wondered how long before Jacob would think to check there to see if Jerry remembered who bought the winning ticket. I needed to move quickly. The next morning, Frank introduced me to Harold Guzman, a former client who now worked as a security consultant. Harold was a bear of a man with surprisingly gentle eyes and a military bearing that suggested he wasn't someone to trifle with. Frank had briefed him on my situation. "I'll help you get to the lottery commission safely," Harold assured me. "And I can provide security afterward when people learn you're the winner." "I'd prefer they didn't learn at all," I said. Harold nodded. "Most states allow you to claim anonymously or through a trust, but word has a way of getting out, especially with jackpots this size. Better to be prepared." With Harold's guidance, we developed a secure plan to claim the ticket. Our state lottery commission required winners to come in person, but allowed claiming through a trust for privacy. Frank expedited the paperwork for the Turner Family Trust, with myself as the sole trustee. 2 days later, with Harold driving and Frank beside me in the back seat of a nondescript sedan, we arrived at the state lottery headquarters. The building was surprisingly mundane, just another government office with fluorescent lighting and motivational posters on beige walls. The claiming process itself was anticlimactic after all the drama. The lottery officials verified my ticket, took copies of my identification, and explained the options for payment. I chose the lump sum, about $4.5 million after federal and state taxes. Frank handled most of the conversation, while I sat quietly still processing the reality that my life had just changed irrevocably. The officials asked if I wanted to do a publicity photo, which was optional in our state. Frank declined on my behalf. "My client prefers to maintain his privacy," he explained smoothly. I noticed he didn't correct their assumption that he was representing a wealthy eccentric rather than a recently homeless carpenter. The funds would be transferred within 2 weeks. In the meantime, Frank helped me open proper bank accounts and connected me with a financial advisor who specialized in sudden wealth management. Harold arranged for extended security at the motel and began searching for a more permanent, secure residence I could lease. It should have been the happiest time of my life. Instead, I felt hollowed out. The money meant freedom, security, and comfort after decades of struggle. But it had cost me my son, my grandchildren, and what little faith I had left in family. As we drove back to the motel, I watched ordinary people going about their ordinary lives and envied them their simplicity. "You did the right thing," Frank said, breaking the silence. "Not just legally, but morally. You earned this." I wasn't so sure. The money felt tainted somehow, as if Jacob's reaction had poisoned even this stroke of fortune. But I nodded anyway, too tired to argue the point. What none of us realized was that our careful precautions were already being undermined. A clerk at the lottery commission, seeing the size of the jackpot, had tipped off a friend at the local news station. By that evening, though they didn't have my name, they had enough details to run a story about the mystery winner from Jerry's convenience store. And it wouldn't take Jacob long to connect the dots. For 3 days after claiming my ticket, I managed to maintain a bubble of privacy. The motel room became my fortress, not much of one with its sagging mattress and flickering television, but it was mine alone. Harold arranged for meals to be delivered and stood guard during the daytime hours. Frank visited daily with updates on the trust establishment and financial arrangements. It wasn't a life exactly, but it was a pause, a chance to breathe and think. Then the bubble burst. I was eating a sandwich and watching an old Western on TV when Harold knocked on my door with an unusual urgency. When I opened it, his normally impassive face was creased with concern. "We've got a situation," he said, stepping inside and turning on the local news channel. Someone leaked details to the press. The perky blonde anchor was mid-sentence. Sources confirm the winner purchased the ticket at Jerry's convenience store on Elm Street, while the winner has claimed the prize anonymously through a trust. Speculation is running high about who the lucky local might be. The camera cut to Jerry himself, looking uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "I sell hundreds of tickets every week," he was saying. "Could be anybody." But the damage was done. Anyone who knew I played the lottery regularly would now know where I bought my tickets. Anyone who knew I'd suddenly disappeared around the time of the winning drawing could connect the dots. Sure enough, my cell phone began ringing almost immediately. Jacob, then Heather, then Jacob again. I silenced it after the third call, but the voicemails piled up. I finally listened to one, my hand shaking. "Dad, please call me back." Jacob's voice sounded desperate. "I'm sorry about what happened. I was stressed and not thinking clearly. Please come home so we can talk this out as a family." Home. The word echoed hollowly. The basement with its concrete floor and exposed pipes had never been home. Even the house I'd shared with Sandra for all its memories had ceased to be home once she was gone. Home was something I would need to create anew. My phone pinged with text notifications. I opened one from Jacob. "Dad, please, the kids miss you. We all miss you. Whatever you want, we can work it out." The emotional whiplash was dizzying. Just days ago, this same son had physically thrown me out of his house. Now he wanted to work it out. The lottery win that had instantly transformed me from burden to asset in his eyes. I showed the messages to Harold, who shook his head grimly. "Classic manipulation. He knows you've got the golden ticket now and wants back in your good graces." "Should I respond?" I asked, hating how uncertain I sounded. "Not yet," Harold advised. "Let's see what else he does first. People show their true colors when they're desperate." I didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, Frank called with disturbing news. "Jacob's filed for an emergency hearing," he said without preamble. "He's claiming you're mentally incompetent and that he's been buying your lottery tickets for years as your caretaker." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "That's completely false." "Of course it is," Frank agreed. "But he's trying to create legal leverage to force you to share the money. He's also filed for a restraining order claiming you've been harassing them with threatening calls." "I haven't called them once." My voice rose with indignation. "I know that, and phone records will prove it. But he's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. And there's more. Heather's been posting on social media that you've had cognitive decline for years and stole their winning ticket when they took you in out of charity." My stomach churned with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The depths to which my own son would sink for money were incomprehensible to me. The carpentry lessons, the fishing trips, the values I thought I'd instilled, had none of it taken root. Frank continued, his voice gentler now. "Randy, we need to move you somewhere more secure. Jacob's been asking around town, and it won't take long to track you to this motel. Harold's found a furnished apartment in a building with security. You can move in tomorrow." I agreed numbly, the full weight of the situation settling over me like wet concrete. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was legal warfare. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the simmering anger beneath my hurt. Jacob hadn't just rejected me. He was actively trying to destroy my reputation and steal what was rightfully mine. The next day, I relocated to the apartment Harold had found. It was in a modern building downtown with a doorman and security cameras, features I'd never imagined needing in my life. The place was impersonally tasteful with sleek furniture and abstract art that conveyed nothing of whoever had chosen it. But it had large windows overlooking the city park, solid doors with good locks, and a small spare room that could serve as a workshop. I set about making it inhabitable, if not quite home. I bought basic tools and lumber from a hardware store wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses to avoid recognition. In the spare room, I began building simple items: a bookshelf, a better desk chair, a small table for the entryway. The familiar rhythm of measuring, cutting, and joining soothed my frayed nerves. Wood didn't lie or manipulate. It simply was what it was. Meanwhile, Frank and his team prepared for the legal battle. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. They gathered evidence of my mental competence, documentation of my lottery-playing history, and statements from people who could verify I'd been buying my own tickets for decades. One key piece of evidence came from Jerry's convenience store, which had security footage showing me purchasing lottery tickets every Wednesday for the past 3 years, including the winning ticket. They also had records of my debit card transactions, proving I'd paid for the tickets myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same media attention that had exposed my winning had also created a paper trail that would help defend my claim. As the days passed, Jacob's desperation escalated. He gave interviews to local news stations, portraying himself as a devoted son worried about his elderly father's well-being. Heather created a social media campaign with carefully selected photos of me looking particularly old or confused, mostly taken when I was exhausted from work or in pain from my knee. Most painful were the videos of Mia and Tyler, clearly coached, asking Grandpa to come home and saying they missed me. Using my own grandchildren as emotional leverage was a low I hadn't thought even Jacob would reach. What Jacob didn't know, what the media hadn't yet uncovered, was that Frank's investigation had revealed the true state of Jacob and Heather's finances. They were drowning in debt. The house was mortgaged to 150% of its value, credit cards were maxed out. And most tellingly, Jacob had taken loans from some particularly unsavory characters who didn't use banks to collect what they were owed. "He's gambling," Frank said bluntly, showing me the documentation. "Has been for years, apparently. The new house, the cars, Heather's designer wardrobe. It's all built on a foundation of cards that was about to collapse when you moved in. That's why they took you in. They were hoping your nest egg from selling your house would buy them time." The revelation should have shocked me, but somehow it didn't. It explained Jacob's increasingly erratic behavior over the years, the constant need for more, the lifestyle that his architectural firm salary couldn't possibly support. "And Heather?" I asked. "She must know." Frank nodded grimly. "Based on the financial records, she's not just aware, she's complicit. There are shopping sprees the day after each big gambling loss, almost like a consolation prize. They're enablers in a dysfunctional dance that was about to end very badly before you won the lottery." The picture came into cruel focus. I wasn't just a burden they'd reluctantly assumed. I was a potential source of funds that had arrived just as they were running out of options. And when my lottery win had appeared like manna from heaven, their desperation had overridden any remaining decency. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I dressed in my best clothes, not fancy but clean and dignified. Frank had advised me to look competent but sympathetic, whatever that meant. Harold drove us to the courthouse where a small cluster of reporters had gathered, tipped off about the lottery dispute. Inside, I saw Jacob and Heather for the first time since that Sunday night. They were dressed expensively, projecting an image of respectable concern. Jacob avoided my eyes, but Heather stared directly at me, her gaze cold and calculating. I looked for the grandchildren, but they weren't present. Small mercies. The hearing itself was surprisingly brief. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened to both sides with minimal interruption. Jacob's attorney painted me as a confused old man being taken advantage of by opportunistic lawyers. Frank presented the evidence of my competence, my lottery purchase history, and the security footage from Jerry's store. When the judge asked me directly about the situation, I spoke plainly. Your Honor, I've bought those same 5 numbers every week for 30 years. They were my wife's birthday, our anniversary, and the day our son was born. I have the bank records showing every purchase. The ticket has my signature on the back. I claimed it legally through a trust to protect my privacy, not to hide anything wrongful. Jacob's attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a look. Mr. Turner, she continued, your son claims you've been living with them because you're unable to care for yourself. Is that accurate? I took a deep breath. No, Your Honor. I moved in because they invited me after I began having financial difficulties. I was sleeping in an unfinished basement with concrete floors. 3 days after I won the lottery, my son physically removed me from the house when I refused to give him my ticket. The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked over at Jacob, whose face had gone pale. Is that true, Mr. Turner? She asked him directly. Did you physically remove your father from your home? Jacob shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't like that. He was becoming agitated and irrational. We were concerned for the safety of our children. I see, the judge said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe him. And the security camera footage from your neighbor across the street showing you dragging an elderly man onto your front lawn. Was that also for safety concerns? I hadn't known about that footage. From Jacob's expression, neither had he. The judge took only 15 minutes to deliberate before returning with her decision. She dismissed Jacob's claims with prejudice, meaning he couldn't refile them. She also vacated the temporary restraining order and warned him about filing false reports. Mr. Turner, she said, addressing me directly, the court finds you fully competent and the rightful owner of the lottery winnings in question. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing your son and daughter-in-law from approaching you or contacting you directly. Any communication must go through your attorney. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the public humiliation of the whole affair. As we left the courtroom, Jacob suddenly broke away from his attorney and rushed toward me. You've ruined us, he shouted, his face contorted with rage. They'll kill me if I don't pay. Is that what you want? Your own son dead because you're too selfish to share? Court officers quickly intervened, pulling him back as he continued to shout increasingly desperate threats. Heather stood frozen, her carefully cultivated image of concerned family member shattered by her husband's outburst. As Harold hustled me out a side door to avoid the press, I caught one last glimpse of Jacob being restrained, his face a mask of fear and fury. In that moment, he was a stranger to me, not the boy who had once sat beside me under starlit skies naming constellations, not the young man who had thanked me with tears in his eyes for his wedding gift. This Jacob had been forged in fires I hadn't even known were burning. And for the first time I wondered if the money was worth the final destruction of what little family I had left. The weeks following the court decision brought an eerie calm, like the stillness after a tornado when survivors emerged to assess the damage and begin rebuilding. The immediate legal threat had passed, but the emotional landscape was forever altered. I moved from the temporary apartment to a modest house I purchased on the edge of town. Nothing ostentatious, but solid and private, with a large detached garage I immediately converted into a proper workshop. The house had a covered front porch with room for 2 rocking chairs, though I only needed one. Sometimes I sat there in the evenings watching the sunset and imagining Sandra beside me, wondering what she would make of everything that had happened. The financial advisor Frank had recommended helped me structure my windfall sensibly. Investments, a health insurance policy that would finally address my knee problems, charitable donations to causes Sandra had supported. I lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. The foreman who had once laid me off due to my slowing pace called offering business opportunities, as did distant acquaintances suddenly remembering our deep friendship. I declined politely, but firmly. Jacob maintained his distance legally required to, but also seemingly by choice. The restraining order prevented direct contact, but he could have communicated through Frank if he'd wanted. The silence spoke volumes about where his true interests had lain. Heather had taken to social media again, portraying themselves as victims of an ungrateful father, but fewer people engaged with her posts now that the court's findings were public record. I missed the grandchildren terribly. Mia and Tyler were innocent in all this, too young to understand the adult complexities that had separated us. I sent birthday gifts through Frank, handcrafted wooden toys I made myself, but never knew if they received them. The thought of them being told their grandfather had abandoned them was a special kind of torment. The unexpected bright spot during this period was the reconnection with old friends who proved more loyal than blood. Tom, my former neighbor, visited regularly for beers on the porch. Jerry from the convenience store refused to give interviews about his winner, but would chat amicably when I stopped in. Harold, initially hired for security, became a fishing buddy, and Frank, going beyond his professional role, invited me to Sunday dinners with his family. I was not alone, but there remained a Jacob-shaped hole in my life that no friendship could quite fill. Then came the visitation I never expected. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was in the workshop focused on a delicate inlay pattern for a jewelry box similar to the one I'd once made for Heather. The irony wasn't lost on me. The sound of car doors slamming registered dimly, but I assumed it was a package delivery until small footsteps pattered across the workshop floor. "Grandpa!" I turned so quickly I nearly dropped my tools. Mia and Tyler stood in the doorway, uncertain but smiling. Behind them, a woman I didn't recognize waited nervously. "We came to see your new house," Mia announced as if this were a regular occurrence. For a moment I couldn't speak, overcome by their presence. Then instinct took over and I knelt despite my protesting knee. "Well, this is a wonderful surprise," I managed, opening my arms. They rushed into my embrace, chattering about the drive and asking about my tools and whether I still made wooden toys. The woman introduced herself as Alice, their babysitter. She explained in hushed tones that Jacob was at work. Heather was at a spa day, and she had decided the children deserved to see their grandfather. "They talk about you all the time," she said simply. It didn't seem right. I knew I should probably send them back immediately. The restraining order was one-directional, but this visit could still cause legal complications. But looking at their eager faces, I couldn't bring myself to cut short this stolen time. "Would you like to see the house?" I asked. "And then maybe help me make something in the workshop." Their enthusiastic agreement settled the matter. For 2 precious hours, we existed in a bubble outside the adult conflicts. I showed them the house, let them run in the backyard, and helped them each create a simple wooden figure in the workshop. Alice watched with a sad smile, clearly understanding the significance of this reunion. When it was time for them to leave to return before they were missed, Tyler asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why don't you come see us anymore? Grandpa Dad says you're mad at us." The unfairness of it stung like salt in an open wound. "I'm not mad at you," I said carefully. "Not at all. Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements that are complicated, but I love you both very much, and I think about you every day." "Dad says you won't share," Mia said with the brutal directness of a 7-year-old. "At school, they say sharing is caring." I took a deep breath. Sometimes sharing is the right thing to do, but sometimes when people demand things instead of asking nicely, or when they aren't honest, it's important to set boundaries. That's a different kind of caring. It was an impossible explanation for children, but I refused to demonize their father despite everything. They left with their wooden creations hidden in their backpacks, so it can be our secret, as Tyler put it. Alice promised nothing explicit, but gave me a look that suggested this might not be their last visit. Later that evening, as I sat with the memory of small hands and innocent questions, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Wary but curious, I answered. "Dad," Jacob's voice rough as if he'd been drinking. "I know I'm not supposed to call you directly." I should have hung up. The restraining order was clear, but parental instinct overrode legal caution. "Jacob," I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. "Is everything all right?" A bitter laugh. "No, everything is not all right. They're taking the house, auctions in 2 weeks. Heather doesn't even know yet." "The bank?" I asked, though I suspected the answer was more complicated. "The bank, other creditors, take your pick." He sounded defeated in a way I'd never heard before. "I've run out of extensions and excuses." The silence stretched between us, 30 years of history crackling across the telephone connection. "I could help." I finally said the words, emerging before I'd fully decided to offer them. "Really?" Hope and suspicion warred in his voice. "What's the catch? You want me to grovel, make some public apology?" "No," I said firmly. "But I would need some assurances. Real ones, not just promises." "Like what?" "Like proof you're addressing the gambling problem. Professional help. Financial counseling. A plan for rebuilding that doesn't involve quick fixes or shortcuts." His sharp intake of breath told me the gambling wasn't something he'd expected me to know about. For a moment I thought he might deny it or hang up. Instead, he surprised me. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "The legal discovery process revealed a lot." I answered. "More than you probably realize." Another long pause. Then, "If I don't come up with 200,000 by next Friday, some very unpleasant people have promised to break more than just my credit score. The gambling started years ago, Dad. After Mom died. Small bets at first, then bigger ones to recover losses. Heather knows but acts like she doesn't, as long as the lifestyle continues." The confession, however self-serving its timing, was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I felt a complicated mixture of vindication, sadness, and tentative hope. "I need to think about this," I said finally, "and consult with Frank. You understand why I can't just write a check given recent history." "Yeah," Jacob sighed. "I get it. For what it's worth, I am sorry about what happened. Not just the lawsuit and everything, but before that. The way we treated you when you moved in. I was so stressed about money all the time that I couldn't see straight." It wasn't a complete apology, and it didn't address the deeper patterns of how he'd drifted away years before the financial crisis. But it was something. A crack in the wall between us that might, with careful tending, widen enough for reconciliation to grow. "I'll be in touch through Frank," I promised. "Soon." That night I barely slept, weighing moral principles against practical realities and emotional desires. By morning I had the outline of a plan, one that would protect my boundaries while potentially saving my son from the consequences of his own terrible choices. Whether that was wisdom or enabling, I couldn't yet say. I met with Frank and my financial advisor the next day, laying out what I wanted to do. Frank was skeptical, calling it throwing good money after bad. The financial advisor was more pragmatic, helping structure an approach that would limit my exposure while achieving the core objectives. The solution we devised was creative, if somewhat convoluted. I would create a trust for Mia and Tyler's education and future needs completely separate from Jacob and Heather's access. I would also, through a shell company Frank established, purchase Jacob's house at the upcoming auction, likely at below market value given the circumstances. The house would be managed by a professional property management company who would collect modest rent from Jacob and Heather, with a portion going toward paying down their other debts. No cash would change hands directly. Jacob and Heather could stay in the house but wouldn't own it or control the equity. Jacob would be required to attend gambling addiction treatment and financial counseling as conditions of the arrangement. The dangerous people would be paid through the shell company, with Frank verifying the legitimacy of the debts. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a path forward that established clear boundaries while acknowledging the reality of our shared blood. Most importantly, it would keep my grandchildren in a stable home environment and potentially give Jacob the structure to rebuild his life. When Frank presented the proposal to Jacob, the response was mixed. Jacob himself seemed genuinely grateful for the lifeline, recognizing it as more than he deserved after everything that had happened. Heather, however, was furious at the restrictions and the loss of ownership. According to Frank, she threatened to leave Jacob if he accepted these humiliating terms. She called it financial abuse and controlling behavior, Frank reported with a raised eyebrow. Apparently, becoming renters in the house they've been pretending to afford is beneath her dignity. I wasn't surprised. Heather had always valued appearance over substance, and this arrangement would make their financial reality publicly visible. What did surprise me was Jacob's response. He told her he's accepting the offer with or without her, Frank continued. Said it was time to stop pretending they were something they're not. First time I've seen that young man show any backbone, frankly. The plan proceeded with legal documents drawn up and signed, conditions clearly established and boundaries firmly set. The dangerous creditors were paid. The auction proceeded with my shell company making the successful bid, and Jacob began attending both Gamblers Anonymous and financial counseling sessions. Heather didn't leave immediately, but her social media posts took on a distinctly martyr-like tone. The facade of perfect family life began to crack as the reality of their situation became impossible to hide. Their friends, accustomed to lavish dinner parties and expensive gifts, drifted away when the lifestyle changed. Through it all, Jacob maintained the terms of our agreement, sending progress reports through Frank and gradually showing signs of genuine change. After 3 months, Frank suggested it might be time to consider modifying the restraining order to allow for direct, supervised contact. I agreed, more ready than I'd expected, to test these fragile new bridges. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye. Spring turned to summer, summer faded into fall, and life settled into patterns I never could have predicted a year earlier. My new house had become truly home. The workshop produced a steady stream of custom furniture pieces that I donated to charity auctions or gifted to friends. My repaired knee, finally properly treated by a specialist, allowed me to enjoy long walks in the nearby nature preserve. I'd joined a senior bowling league on Thursday nights, discovering a talent for the sport I never knew I possessed. Most significantly, I'd established a community woodworking program at the local youth center, teaching carpentry skills to teenagers who, like Jacob, once had showed aptitude for working with their hands. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the shop filled with the sound of careful measurements being called out and the satisfaction of projects taking shape. Many of these kids came from difficult circumstances, and I recognized in their focus the same escape I'd always found in woodworking: the ability to create order from chaos, beauty from raw materials. The program had an unexpected side benefit. A portion of the proceeds from items sold at the seasonal craft fair went to addiction recovery programs in the community. It felt right, channeling my lottery winnings into something that might prevent others from falling into the traps that had snared Jacob. As for my son, the changes in him emerged slowly, like a carving gradually revealed in wood. The supervised visitations began awkwardly, neither of us quite sure how to bridge the chasm between us. We met at a neutral coffee shop, Frank present for the first few encounters to ensure compliance with the modified restraining order. The third such meeting brought the first genuine breakthrough. Jacob arrived carrying a small wooden box, clearly handmade with visible flaws but earnest effort. "I made this," he said, sliding it across the table. "At a community workshop. It's the first thing I've built since that birdhouse when I was a kid." I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded note that read simply, "I'm sorry. For everything. No excuses." The box itself wasn't much. Uneven joints, slightly misaligned lid, finish unevenly applied. But it represented something beyond its physical form, effort, humility, a willingness to be bad at something, in service of making amends. "It's a good start," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "Solid foundation to build on." Jacob nodded, understanding. I meant much more than woodworking. Heather eventually did leave, finding the reality of living within actual financial means intolerable. At first, Jacob was devastated, but as weeks passed, he began to recognize the relationship had been built on materialism rather than genuine connection. The children adjusted with the resilience unique to the young, especially once regular visits with me became part of their routine. The day I invited Jacob and the kids to Sunday dinner at my house marked another milestone in our careful reconstruction. I watched him notice the modest furnishings, the absence of extravagant purchases, despite my lottery winnings. "You could have anything you want," he observed as the children played in the backyard. "And you chose this." I followed his gaze around the comfortable but simple living room. "I have what matters," I replied. "Security, purpose, peace." He nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand that now." That evening, after they'd gone home, I sat on my porch watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. The journey from that concrete basement floor to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. The lottery win that Jacob had seen as the answer to all problems had indeed changed everything, just not in the ways any of us had anticipated. True wealth, I'd discovered, had little to do with the numbers in my bank account. It lived in the freedom to help others without expectation, in the value of self-respect over approval-seeking, in the friends who stood by me when I had nothing, in the peace that came from creating boundaries with love. Money, I now understood, didn't create character. It merely revealed it. Second chances had to be earned, not demanded. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or enabling harmful patterns. And dignity came from within, not from circumstances or possessions. As stars appeared overhead, the same stars Jacob and I had once named together on camping trips, I reflected on life's unexpected twists. The lottery hadn't been the real win. The truth had been. The inheritance worth passing down wasn't financial, but moral. And the road ahead, while uncertain as all futures are, could be traveled with the lessons of the past as a guide. Sometimes, when life deals you an unexpected hand, the true victory isn't in the cards you're holding, but in how you play them. In standing firm in your truth while leaving the door open for genuine change. In recognizing that everyone deserves dignity, even those who temporarily forget their own. Have you ever had to make tough decisions about helping family members who've hurt you? Where do you draw the line between setting healthy boundaries and giving second chances? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what we gain, but from what we refuse to lose: our self-respect, our compassion, and our capacity for growth. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may your own life's journey bring you the wisdom to recognize true wealth when you find it.